everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Dave Bailey. This is Grief and Grace. Grief is perhaps more than anything else the common human experience that ties us all together, regardless of race or color or creed or age or language. And the goal of this Facebook Live is to be a space where we can learn about and talk about grief in all of its multifaceted ways. And my guest tonight is Tiffany Jenkins from the Trauma Intervention Program in Las Vegas. TIP is a nonprofit organization that works closely with local emergency response agencies, training citizen volunteers who are then available to come to emergency scenes and provide emotional and practical support to family members and witnesses and other bystanders. And Tiffany's going to walk us through some of that training that they do for those volunteers. And I know that you will find her insights and her understandings invaluable. So, Tiffany, thank you for taking the time to be with us here at Grief and Grace.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited about this.
Yes, so am I. We've been trying to put this together for quite a few months, and I'm
Yeah.
excited that we're able to do this. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the various communities and agencies that you work with and introduce us to the training that you're going to do.
Okay. So, like you said, I'm from the Trauma Intervention Program, or TIP, as we call it. And we are in Las Vegas, but the TIP organization was actually started in Orange County, California, about 35 years ago. We have about 16 chapters across the country, and I'll have a slide up that'll show you where all of those are in a minute. But here in Las Vegas, we work with all emergency response agencies: fire, police, hospitals, coroner's office, and even occasionally businesses that request us out. So we get called out by those emergency responders when someone is going through tragedy. Most of the time there's been a death.
Yes. Wow. And you do this kind of training for them to give them the skills they need to deal with the trauma and the grief situations. Wow.
Yeah, we do. So we do kind of a shortened version of what we teach our volunteers. We teach to emergency responders at different lengths, kind of different settings.
Yeah, very cool. All right, I'm just going to bring up your PowerPoint and turn it over to you. And I want to let you know, those of you who are watching, if you have questions as Tiffany is teaching, if you just want to put them in the comments, we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. All right, let me bring you up. There we go. All right, take it away, Tiffany.
There we go. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a volunteer with the Trauma Intervention Program for about 5.5 years. And then I joined TIP staff as the outreach manager last December. So it's been just about a year. It is my passion. I love what we do. I love the impact that we have when we are out on scenes with people that are going through tragedy. And I was super excited to be able to take on the responsibility to be able to share what we do with other people. Go ahead to the next slide. So the mission of TIP, basically, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring that those who are emotionally and traumatized in emergency situations receive the assistance that they need. Like I said, we are called out by all emergency response agencies in order to help citizens that are going through tragedy. What was discovered was that people who are going through trauma and tragedy, if they receive care from any person who is able to reach out in those hours immediately following a tragedy, their need for long-term therapy often decreases. Go ahead to the next one.
All right.
So this is some facts about the Trauma Intervention Program here in Las Vegas. Most of what we get called out on is death. That can be a car accident, a homicide, a suicide. Most often it's a natural death because most people do die of natural causes. And so we will respond to people's homes, and we have emergency responders there on scene with us while they go through that investigative process and have the coroner investigator and the mortuary pick up their loved one. Our volunteers are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nights, weekends. There's always somebody available. We've never missed a call. So even if our, volunteers that are on call for that particular shift are out on a call, all of our other volunteers will pick up and back up and be able to make sure that we get everybody taken care of. Our volunteers arrive within about 30 minutes of a call. They are basically ready to leave their house within 5 minutes of receiving that call from emergency responders. So our goal is to get out there very quickly.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is quick, and sometimes emergency responders, sometimes we beat police there. We'll get called out by fire, and when we get there, police haven't even arrived yet. So we want to get out there as quickly as possible. Our volunteers are very highly trained. They go through a 36-hour training academy where they learn emotional first aid skills, and as well as how to work within the emergency response system. And then they do continuing education every month. Like I said, there are 13 affiliates across the country. The next slide will show you where they're located. A lot of them are in California. Like I said, that's where it began, but we are across the country. And so if they're, those that are on watching are in any of those areas, you can know that there's a TIP affiliate nearby. And it's one of the things that I love getting from feedback from our clients is, I never knew anything like this existed. I'm so thankful you are at my scene. Or we'll have people that are visiting from other states and say, I wish that my neighbor or my community had a service like this when they've interacted with us here in Las Vegas. So we are very lucky to have it here in Las Vegas. We have a very good reputation and relationship with our emergency responders here. On to the next one. So these are our Las Vegas statistics from last year. We responded to 1,600 scenes, more than that, and assisted more than 7,000 citizens here in the Clark County, Las Vegas area. At any one time, we have 60 to 80 volunteers. We just finished an academy, so we've got some new volunteers that we're really excited about. We usually have 2 academies a year to be able to keep that number pretty steady between 60 and 80 volunteers. And then we have 3 paid staff that have been with TIP for, I'm new to staff, but the other 2 have been with our TIP staff for quite a long time. Our funding, it's like I said, it's a nonprofit, so it comes through local government agencies who are so supportive of what we do that we are kind of line item on their budget. They support us and want us out on their scenes. And then we do fundraising each year as well. On to the next one. So that was just kind of my overview of TIP, and the rest of my presentation will be just some emotional first aid, things that can be used by any caring person. We are not therapists, we are not counselors. It's one of the things that sometimes gets confused when we do arrive on scene and we tell our emergency responders, don't confuse people, that's not what we're here for. We are not trained to give that long-term therapy. We are trained to be able to assist and support in those hours immediately following a tragedy, sometimes up to a couple days after, depending on the situation. I think we get really confused and have a hard time when we know people that are going through trauma, and we want to be able to reach out and we want to do something for them, but nobody ever knows exactly what to do. And so it's very common that we do and we say the wrong things. So I'm just going to teach a little bit about what to do that will be effective and helpful on those when you're helping other people that you know that are going through trauma and tragedy. So kind of what to expect is a better understanding of someone that's going through crisis, the importance of emotional first aid, how to use a caring demeanor and what that means and what that looks like, how to connect with someone in crisis. That's the most important thing that we do, is learning how to connect. Our introduction when we enter a scene is really important as volunteers, so that those people understand that we are there to be with them. And then how to stay connected. And everybody's favorite is the list of what not to say or do. You'll probably laugh when you see that list and say, oh, I've said all of those things when I've tried to support somebody, and it's because we don't know what else to say. So I'm going to teach you how to be helpful and not hurtful when you are trying to assist others that are grieving. Um, Basically, the importance of emotional first aid is that minutes of skillful support by any sensitive person immediately after the trauma is worth more than hours of professional counseling later. I love that. And this is something that our founder, Wayne Fortin, discovered as a therapist 35 years ago, kind of noticed that um, there was kind of a gap between when people were going through the tragedy and when he would see them in his therapist office. And the research has now backed it up. There's a lot of science behind this now, which I wish I could go into. It would take hours to go over all the science that's behind it, but it is very intriguing and it supports what we do and what we've been doing for so long. So our take-home message number one, and if you only remember one thing from this entire presentation, it's this: everyone grieves differently. There are many common reactions, a lot of things that are the same between people, but there's no right or wrong way to grieve. I learned this, and I've known this for 5 years. I've taught it to people, and I recently had a death in my family. And it was interesting because when I drove to California to be with my family, I had a conversation with my sister-in-law. And the short story is, we had driven 3 hours to get to there. It was actually my father who died. And I cried the whole way there. And my kids knew what was going on. My dad is very loved and very missed. And my sister and brother showed up, and they had dropped their kids off at some other family's house. And they had driven about 2 hours from where they were to get to my parents' house that day. And they hadn't told their kids. And I said, how in the world did you drive for 2 hours without your kids knowing that something was wrong? Like, I would between, sobbing and crying, and my kids were crying. And how in the world did you drive for so long without them knowing what was wrong? And my sister-in-law said, I'm not really a crier. I've never been a very emotional person. It takes me a little bit longer to process what's going on. And growing up, people always thought something was wrong with me because I didn't cry. And my oldest, who is now 18, was in the room, and he puts his hands out in the air and he said, everyone grieves differently. And it was so funny because apparently it's something that I say often enough that he knew exactly what I was going to say. He knew what the answer was. And I told her that. I said, that's actually normal. Not everybody cries. Not everybody is emotional like that. And that's okay. And she said, you're the first person who's ever told me that. And it meant so much to me that my training and the things that I could do, I could be able to help my family as we are going through tragedy. So on the next screen, we'll kind of go over some of those common things that we see in grief. Everyone's heard of the 5 stages of grief, but one of the things that's a little bit confused with those 5 stages is it doesn't go in order. People don't go through every stage, and they definitely don't go through it in order. People bounce back and forth between shock and denial, and then sometimes go back to shock. Or some people have those physical symptoms like crying and nausea and the screaming and flailing and those type of things, and some people don't. One of the things I see the very most common on all the tip scenes that I've been on is guilt. Even when people have had absolutely no control over a situation, they've done everything they possibly could for their loved one, they still feel guilty. They still feel like, if I had just called 911, if we had just forced him to an ambulance, if I had just taken him to the doctor sooner, they always they blame themselves or they blame others, and that's something that we see as well. There's fear. I was on a call recently where I've never seen someone have so much fear. This particular situation was a 13-year-old boy whose father had died, and they thought that it might be due to COVID. And this boy had type 1 diabetes, and he'd heard in the news that that's one of those risk factors with COVID is that you could die from it. And he was terrified that his mom was going to die and that he was going to die. And it was that sign of grief, that form of grief that he was going through as he was trying to come to terms with what was going on. So we see a lot of these things that are common, but you're not going to see all the same thing. And it can be this, you can have the same family that grew up in the same situation and they can all handle it completely differently. That was something that I saw with my own siblings when we were dealing with the death of my father. We all had different ways of handling it. And same with my mom. And so even though we grew up in the same household, it's not genetic necessarily on how we're going to deal with grief. So when we're dealing with people that are going through grief, we need to give them that grace that the way that they are grieving is normal and it's okay. I think a lot of times we want to force them into a certain direction and how to grieve, and what people need to know is that they are normal. I recently had a friend who lost her sister and her nephew very tragically, and she called me up and just needed support, and I left work and I drove to her house and I sat there and I spoke with her family members, and one was her niece who was 16, and she asked me a couple of questions while I was there, and she would start it off with, is it normal that I ... And she had a couple different things about how she was handling her grief. And I was able to explain to her that, yes, that's very normal. That's common in the situation that you're going through. And after talking to me for a little bit, her mom turned to her and she said, are you feeling any better? And she says, yeah, now I know that at least I'm a little bit normal. And she was able to leave that room with that reassurance that what she was going through was normal, and that's what she needed to be able to deal with her grief.
Wow.
The next thing is how to have a caring demeanor. Focus more on your body language and tone of voice. We are always so worried about what we're going to say, and really what we say doesn't matter. When people are going through tragedy, they don't really hear what we have to say, but they notice how we said it and they notice that we showed up. Go ahead to the next slide. We'll go over some details of the Moravian model of communication. Basically is how we communicate emotionally. And so most of what people hear emotionally is our body language, and kind of how we interact with them and what we do. Only 7% of what they hear is the actual words that are spoken. They're going to forget what we said pretty much immediately if they hear it at all. But the way we show it and the way that we show a caring demeanor is by getting close. Be by their side and be at their level. So if I was to go and to support somebody, I would, if they're sitting on the couch, I'm going to sit down on the couch next to them. Or if there's not a place for me to sit, I'm going to kind of crouch down at their level so that our faces are kind of at the same level. If we stand over them, it feels like we're trying to be in control. It's a little bit scary, kind of puts us in a situation where we're being in, it's an intimidating situation for the people that we're talking to. We teach this to our emergency responders as well. They're there to do an investigation, and often it's a sweet, 80-year-old woman who has passed away, and her husband is there, and that police officer just needs to ask some basic questions. But when he's standing over there, kind of domineering, it's a little bit scary and intimidating, and they think that maybe they're under investigation, where that's not the case. So when we teach them to get down at their level and to use a calm voice, to not sound like we are trying to control the situation or that we're doing an investigation where they might be in trouble, but to use that calm, quiet voice. I'm going to match my voice with them. So I'm not going to be projecting across the room. I'm going to be right there where they can hear me, and I can use a calm voice so that it can help to calm them as well. We don't use jargon. I'm not going to use the terms of emotional first aid skills and what I do. I'm not going to say, oh, this is what I'm doing right now, or this is what you should be doing with your children, use this skill. And doctors shouldn't be using medical terminology. Police officers shouldn't use their jargon, because those people on that tragedy aren't going to understand it. Even if they're from the same type of field, in those moments, their mind is confused and disorganized, and they're not going to understand that. So we use just simple language that's going to help them understand that we care and to be able to get the message across that we need to. And obviously be respectful, and be aware of the body language that we're using. If you stand and you've got your hands on your hips and or you're crossed your arms over like this, and they think that you're, bored, or you're looking at your watch, or there's a lot of different things that we can do that make it look like we're distracted or we don't care about who we're there to be with. So that caring demeanor is really important. And that's what they're going to remember when we leave, is that we were there and that we cared. You can go on to the next one. So take home message number 3, acknowledge and validate what someone is saying to create a connection. So this part is really, really important. When I arrive on a tip scene as a volunteer, the way that I introduce myself is really important. You can go to the next screen as I'm explaining this part, but I introduce myself exactly the same way. I say, hi, my name is Tiffany. I'm the volunteer that the police department asked to be here with you. Can you tell me what happened? And they are going to almost always go into a story and tell me what happened. They'll tell me about the death of their loved one, or the accident that they were just in, or the whatever scary thing happened. And that then leads an opportunity for me to allow them to open up about what they're feeling and what they're going through. It's really important to listen very carefully, because they may not say what we think they're going to say. For example, if I was to say, tell me what happened, and they, told me that their loved one had died, and then I kind of stopped listening after that, and I didn't listen to the whole story, and I say, oh, I'm so sorry that, that he died. And they'd say, well, were you not listening to me? He was a horrible person. He was abusive. I'm glad he's dead. So we have to be really careful to listen to what they're saying and acknowledge what they say. We call it empathetic phrases. So if someone were to say, I lost my loved one and I'm so sad, we would say, it sounds like you're very sad because you lost your husband. And we use what we call the parodying technique, where we use the words that they said to us back. So it almost sounds silly, but it's really effective. One of the things, when we kind of go back to that everybody grieves differently, is that you can have those two people on a scene that are going through different stages of grief right at that moment, different feelings. For example, if you had maybe a suicide, say a girl completed suicide, and you're there, I arrive and I'm there with the mom, who is completely distraught. She's lost her daughter and she misses her so much, and she says things like, I loved her. I am so upset that she's gone. I don't know what I'm going to do without her. And I would use the empathetic phrase. I would acknowledge what she said. I would say, it sounds like you're very upset that your daughter is gone. But I could be in the same house with a sister of the deceased, and she could be mad. Her sister completed suicide and it was her choice, and she didn't have to do that. And how could she do that? And how could she leave that? I am so angry at my sister. And I would do exactly the same thing. It sounds like you are angry with your sister. I'm going to use exactly the same word she used. I'm not going to say, oh, it sounds like you're mad, because that prescribes a feeling that she may not be feeling. It's a little bit different. Anger and mad is, they're different words. So I'm going to listen very carefully, and I'm going to use exactly the words they say. I'm going to acknowledge what they've said to me. And then the next step, after we acknowledge, go ahead, is we're going to validate what they say. We're going to normalize their feelings. So just like I said with that sweet 16-year-old girl, she wanted to know that she was normal, and that the way that she was dealing with her grief was okay, that there wasn't something wrong with her. So I would say the same thing to both the mother and the daughter. I would parrot back the things that they said. I would say, it sounds like you are angry, and that is not an uncommon way to feel. Or to the mom, it sounds like you are upset that your daughter is dead and that you miss her. And that is a very normal way to feel in a situation like this. And then I can explain to them, because the mother and the daughter may be confused. Well, how can it be normal to be upset and normal to be angry when we're talking about exactly the same situation? We're talking about exactly the same person. And I can explain that everyone grieves differently, and that it is okay to feel this way, and it is okay to feel different in the way that they're handling their grief. And as we do this, acknowledge and validate, that creates connection, which is on the next slide. So we do it in lots of different ways. If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you are frustrated, and it is not uncommon to be frustrated in a situation like this. It sounds like you are sad. Many people find themselves sad in these situations, and that's okay. And that builds connection with the people that we are there to support. We've listened to what they said, we've acknowledged it. I have people ask sometimes, well, doesn't it sound, don't people think you're strange if you repeat back what they said? I said, no, they recognize that you are listening to them. And often when people are grieving, what they need to know is that they are heard. And then they need to know that what they're going through is okay and it's normal. And so that they feel that they are validated in their feelings and that they can almost gives them permission to grieve in the way that they're grieving. And that creates connection with the people that we're supporting so that they will want us to be there and they will know that we are there to support them. The most important part of my introduction is I am here to be with you. A lot of times we want to say, I'm here to help. But in a situation like this, especially if there's been death, there's nothing we can do to help them. What they want is their loved one back, and we can't change that. We can't do anything about that. We can't help them, but we can be there for them, and we can be there in their grief. Go on to the next step. So one of the other things that we do when we are out supporting people is make sure that they're doing okay. Watch out for their well-being. I remember we had a meeting with a director of the UNLV, the practice. It's a counseling therapy practice here in Las Vegas at UNLV. And she was talking about how after 1 October, she was requested to come to the, I think it was the Thomas and Mack Center, where all of the students were gathering that had been affected by that mass shooting on 1 October in 2017. And she went into it thinking that she was going to be the therapist and that she was going to be there to give that, to be able to help people with their mental health and the things that they were going through. And she said that when she arrived on scene, what she found was what people needed were water and cell phone chargers and shoes. They needed these very basic things. When we are going through trauma, we sometimes forget those basic needs. We forget that we have medications to take or we haven't had any water to drink. Sometimes, people will be there and they'll be so emotional, they'll be crying and crying and crying and they won't drink any water and they're going to get dehydrated. In Vegas, we have to worry about heat. In the summer, it is so hot. So we sometimes will have umbrellas or just find shade. I always carry a bag that's got water and Gatorade and juice boxes and things like that to kind of take care of the people that we're there to support. We help watch out for their well-being, those basic needs that they may be forgetting about. It could be, gloves or blankets for the kids. Sometimes we have things to entertain them, like coloring books and crayons. And then we have snacks like granola bars, things that we can give them if they do need food in order to sustain what they're, through an investigation if they're outside or on a scene for a long time. So we always bring those kind of things with us, and we kind of watch out for them and make sure that they're taking care of themselves and watch out for other people that aren't seen as well. Sometimes there are children that are unseen and their parents are so distraught about what they're going through that they very understandably forget that their kids need to be taken care of too. And so sometimes we watch out for them and make sure that they're being taken care of as well. Go on to that next slide. So the key concept number 4 is that individuals in crisis need information. One of the things that we lose when we are going through tragedy is control. We've gone through something that we had no control over, and that loss of control that we feel is what makes it feel so hard, because we now don't have any control over what just happened and we don't know what's going to happen next. And one of the ways that we can give people control back in those situations is to give them up-to-date information and accurate information. Go ahead to the next slide. As I explain that, one of the things we tell the police officers is, I'm here to help you so that you can be able to do your investigation and know that these people, these survivors, is what we call them, survivors of tragedy, that they're being taken care of. And I'm going to be kind of a liaison between those survivors and those emergency responders on scene. I'm going to kind of give information to the people when I have it. We have a lot of knowledge and information on mortuary procedure and coroner procedure and what's going to happen next in investigation. A lot of times I can answer those questions for those survivors so that we don't have to bother the emergency responders during their investigation. And then if there's a question that I don't know the answer to, like why did this happen, or what's going to happen next in the investigation. And maybe I don't know who those detectives are that arrived on scene. I can go and I can talk to the officers, and they are usually happy to explain to me what's going on. And then I can go back to my survivors and I can tell them, well, this is who just showed up and why they're here, and this is what's going to happen next. So we try to help out with that big information gap. And as we give them information, it's powerful and it gives them control back in their life as they're dealing with the tragedy. We help them organize. If you think about a person who's going throughout their day, there's a story about a sweet lady who her husband wasn't feeling well, and they went to the hospital, and he just hadn't been feeling well and they decided they better take him and have him checked out. And so he went to like an urgent care. I don't remember exactly where. And and the wife is sitting in the waiting room while they take him back to be examined, and she's thinking about how they're going to, as soon as he's done with the doctor, he's going to have a prescription, and they'll take it to the pharmacy, and then they'll go grab some lunch, and then they had a couple errands to run, and then they'll go home and make dinner. And while she's sitting there and she's thinking about all of these old demands, all of these things that she had planned for the day, the doctor comes out and tells her that unfortunately her husband died. And now she is faced with all of these new demands that she had no idea she was going to have to figure out that day. She's going to have to tell her children. She's going to have to choose a mortuary. She's going to have to figure out how to plan a funeral. And all of those old demands and those new demands kind of clash together, and she becomes overwhelmed. And so often we help them organize. We help them figure out what's most important, what can wait, what needs to be done right now, and what can wait till tomorrow, and help them to figure that out. And sometimes we make a list with them if that's helpful. You can go on to the next one. So take home message number 5, individuals in crisis will survive without us. I sometimes have to remind myself when I'm on a situation with someone who is all alone or who's going through something really hard that they survived without me before. They're going to survive without me when I leave a scene, or, there are going to be people in their life that can help them, or we help them find their source of strength. People can survive tragedy. We've seen it over and over and over. People are able to get through the worst situations we can possibly imagine, and they're able to make it through. Maybe not over. We say people don't get over tragedy. They don't get over the loss of a loved one, but they can get through it, and they can find strength to continue on with their life. So we're going to help them to find their source of strength. That's on the next slide. The source of strength can be many different things. It's very individual and it can change over time. A spiritual source of strength could be a Bible or a pastor or a priest, somebody from their church that's going to support them, or just that belief in a God. And we can help them, when they point out that that is something that is important to them. If it's something that they bring up, we can facilitate having that person be there at that scene with them. Source of strength can be something tangible, like a blanket or a wedding ring or the cell phone of their loved one. Sometimes they like to hold it in their hand, and it helps to remind them of the person that they lost. It can be social. We often, all the time, ask, is there somebody that can be here with you? Find out if they have friends or family members that live close in town, and see if we can help to get those people there. One of my absolute favorite things about being on these tip scenes and supporting people going through trauma and tragedy are memories. I love sitting with that, 85-year-old couple who's been married for 50 years and listening to their love story. I love hearing about where they met and what they've gone through in their life and the adventures they've been on. And most of the time, they love telling those memories, and they find a lot of comfort and strength in the memories of their loved one and the life that they lived together. I've left scenes so many times feeling like I've gotten to know these people that had been complete strangers, and now I feel like they're friends because I've learned so much about them and their memories. It is an honor that they let me be there and that they share those things with me. And it is something that helps them and becomes a source of strength for them as well, as they're able to remember those memories. All right. One of the things that is really hard for us when we go out is to leave ourselves in the car. And this is the same for everybody who's giving support. We have our lives and our belief systems and our prejudices and our, the experiences that we've gone through in life. And we have to remember to leave that in the car. When we go, for us as volunteers, we're going to help complete strangers that live in very different ways of life. Um, and that may be the case for a lot of other people. Even if it's a coworker or somebody you know, they may live their personal life different than what it looks like at work. And so we have to remember that we have to leave those preconceptions in the car and that we have to be able to arrive with kind of a blank slate in our minds and don't expect something specific because we don't know what we're about to walk into and how we're going to support those people. And we need to be able to leave those things aside. We do. Training academies, we talk to our volunteers, and we also do this with emergency responders. We teach what's called ETIP, where it's a shortened version of our volunteer academy, where we teach these emotional first aid skills to emergency responders. And one of the things I ask them is, what do you have to leave in your car? And I love hearing their answers as they begin to realize the things that may be important to them, but that they need to leave in their car. I'll say, I might pray the whole way to support somebody, but when I walk in that house, I am not going to lead them in prayer. I am not going to ask them if they want to pray, but I'm going to support whatever their source of strength is when I am there. So go on to the next slide. It's hard sometimes because we want to take what we know brings us comfort and give it to them, but we have to figure out what their source of strength is and kind of leave ourselves out of it. And then here's that favorite page that everybody loves to hear. I'll never forget being on a call with a woman who is supporting her daughter-in-law. And at one point she comes up to me and she says, every time I try to say something to my daughter-in-law, she starts to cry all over again. I'm trying so hard to support her. And I don't know what to do. And I'd been there for a little bit when she said this to me and I'd heard some of the things she said. And so I pulled out our resource guide that we leave on scene, and we actually have a whole page of these things not to say. And, I opened it up to the book and I said, well, why don't you take a look at this page? And she goes, okay, I'll do that. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to step out. And she comes back in a few minutes later and I said, was that helpful? And she looked at me, she said, I said all the wrong things. And in my head, I'm thinking, yes, yes, you did. But she knew now what not to say. These things that we think are going to make people feel better. Like, I know how you feel. I've been through this before. That doesn't help anybody. Our situations are totally different. And it doesn't matter if we've, had a death that was similar or it's God's will. Until they've said that to me, that they believe it's God's will, I'm not going to say it to them because that's not what they want to hear right then. And we definitely can't say things will be better tomorrow because we don't know. We don't know if things are going to be okay. So take a look at that list and remember what not to say. All right, so review of our messages. Everyone grieves differently. There are very common reactions, but people go through them in different ways. Grief is messy, and that's okay. And there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Focus on a caring demeanor. Don't worry so much about what you say, other than the things not to say. It's how you say it and showing that you are a caring presence and that you're there to be with them. Acknowledge and validate. Listen to what they have to say, repeat it back. It sounds like you are really sad that your sister is gone. And it's very normal to feel that way in a situation like this. People need to feel that what they're going through is normal. Help them with information and take care of them. And then obviously that one at the very end, help them to find their source of strength so that when you leave, they will be able to move on without you and that they'll be able to continue through their grief.
Yeah. Tiffany, that was amazing.
Thank
Thank you.
you. You're welcome.
So many gems. What I love is the ability to have this archive both on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel that people can find if they just put in Grief and Grace on
Yeah.
YouTube. The one thing, so many things. I could just go through a list of the things you said that were just amazing. But it really tugged on my heart when you said, what we say to people is, I'm here to be with you, not that I'm here to help you. And that piece of wisdom, just being able to say to people, or even to know inside yourself, no matter what situation you're in, what trauma situation, grief situation, family situation, situation at work, whatever it is, I'm just here to be with you. That's all. I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to help you. I'm not here to have the answers. I'm here to be with you. That's an amazing piece of, just amazing. Yeah.
It really is. It
Thank you.
really is. And it's simple. Sometimes we say it's simple. It may not be easy. Sometimes it's hard to just be there with someone. Sometimes silence is more important
Yes.
than what we say, but just being there is so important.
Yes. Yes. Years ago, after the Rwandan massacre, I helped to sponsor a family, a Rwandan family, into Canada. And we were talking about the massacre and about their funeral, um, or grieving, how they grieved in their culture. And the mom told me, she said, you know what? When someone dies, when someone in a family dies, we have a 7 day period, which is very much like the Jewish period of Shiva, but they would have this custom where they would just bring food or bring whatever to the family, and they would just sit with them. No one ever said
Mhm.
a word. They would just come to the family home, and they would sit there, and for 7 days they would take care of all of the family's needs and just be with them. I'm just here to be with you. And that always
Mhm.
impressed me. It always left a deep impression on me. The whole idea of just being able to be with people and not have any kind of necessity to fix them.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Uh, so I want to do two things with you. I always try to close out our live with some variation of this question. What is the one insight about grief that you wish everyone understood? If someone said to you, Tiffany, tell me one thing, the most important thing that I need to know about grief, what would it be?
Well, you've heard me say it a couple times. Everyone grieves differently. And
Yeah.
I always, from now on, will picture my 18-year-old son with his hands out in the air and knowing that I don't remember ever teaching him that, but that I have over and over that everyone grieves differently. And it's okay. It's okay if people don't grieve the same way that we do. And
Yeah.
it's okay to let them grieve however it is. And I know I've repeated that a million times, but it really is the most important. Everyone grieves differently.
Yes.
In fact, I think about your story there, and my friend that I had gone to visit who had lost her sister and her nephew so tragically, she told me that her culture was the same way, that that's what people did. Up until the funeral, they would come and they'd bring food and they would do all of these things. And she's like, I don't think I can do this for a week. And I said, well, that's okay. What if you went and stayed in a hotel for the night? And I gave her that permission to grieve the way that she needed to, even though that was normal and that was their culture. For her, it wasn't comforting. And so I gave her that permission and gave, her family, I let her family know that it was okay for her to go and to grieve on her own if she needed to. And that's okay.
That's totally brilliant. I want to bring up your web page. Let me just go over here and bring up the website. Bring us back over there. And yeah, maybe walk us through the website. How would people get involved with TIP if they're there in Vegas, obviously? But how would they contact a TIP um, affiliate?
Affiliate.
How would they
Mhm.
get involved if they wanted to do something like this? Or is there a way that people could launch a trauma intervention program in the city that they're in?
Absolutely. So our website's going to show, tip of Las Vegas, and tip national is tipnational.org, I believe. I'm running it up real quick here. Um, And on there, they'll have a list of links to all the different affiliates. Yeah, it's tipnational.org. And they'll have the different affiliates and then the contact to our Tip National, to the CEO and to the founder. And if they wanted to be able to start an organization, if there isn't one there, and they can kind of walk them through how to do that. And we are definitely always wanting to spread, like I said, people once they realize that we exist, are so grateful. And I go on scenes sometimes where I'm like, I don't know how people got through this without a tip volunteer. Not necessarily me, but anybody. And so you can contact Tip National that way. If you're in Las Vegas, this is our website, and you can go under volunteer to be able to volunteer. The other thing that's really great about our website is there's a lot of resources that can be for anybody. This one, it'll show you all of the different ways to get involved and how you can support TIP and donate and things like that and volunteer. But right there in the center is that grief and mourning resources. And when you click on that, there's a lot of different resources that are very specific to what people are going through. I love the children's resources that are listed under here. They are, most of them are from Alan Wolfeltz, who is a researcher and writer on grief. And he goes through and, there's it's like a 1 or 2 page kind of essay on how to help people that are going through specific things. So I love the section. It's kind of towards the bottom, but on children, because children grieve differently than adults. Teenagers are different, and the younger the children are, they are different. And it helps. I love giving parents that resource on how to understand what their child is going through and how they can help them through it. And then there's very specific ones too, the way that somebody dies or how you're related to them and all of those different things, how to plan a funeral, what's important for a memorial creation, those related topics. So these resources are not specific to Las Vegas. Our community resource guide that is listed on there on the other page as well is pretty specific to Las Vegas and the resources and counseling and support groups and emergency response agencies are very specific to Las Vegas. But this page can be used for anyone. So anybody who's going through that grief and that tragedy can go to our website and can see those resources.
Wow, thank you. And so they can go there. They can volunteer. Go to tip tip national
Tip National. Yeah.
national dot
tipnational.org.
org.
Yep.
All right, and
And
so
that Tip National page also has the link to all of the other affiliates.
that is awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the generous gift of your time, your wisdom, your insights. And yeah,
Thank you.
I so appreciate you being a guest tonight. And I
I love
know
that
that
you do
I'm going to
this.
go back and watch this again and again. There were so many little tidbits in there. I was like, yes, yes. And
Yeah,
I know that this was specifically designed to train volunteers that are going to trauma scenes, but all of us find ourselves in situations where we're dealing with grief inside of our family or grief inside of our social network, and life is unpredictable, and so
absolutely.
we all need these skills. I'm here to be with you. I'm not here to help. I'm here to be with you. I love that. I'm going to be thinking
Yeah,
about that today. Yes. All right. Thank you, Tiffany.
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I totally appreciate you being with us tonight. All right. I hope this has been a great help to you. And even after this live is over, you can still leave comments or questions. I'll be coming back to interact with those, to review the comments as we go forward. Please don't forget to click on live notifications so that you can get a reminder whenever it is we're going live. And if you've gotten value out of this tonight, please feel free to share it on all of your social media platforms. All right. Thank you for being with us tonight. Be safe, everybody.